firstly, welcome to my esteemed panel. I think we've got a good mix of players, in the sector as operators and leaders within the mining industry. We've got academia around governance and can certainly provide a lot of insights around what is required to drive the sector forward to make sure Africa is competitive in a very fast evolving landscape. And of course, we've got the chamber here as well, who can provide insights in terms of how they see and view this from the lenses that they are coming from. And hopefully everybody's had a productive day or so, and you enjoyed last night. There's been some interesting themes that I understand have been discussed here. The obvious one is, the fast evolving landscape in terms of demand for the kind of critical minerals and metals out there, especially, around this transition that we're going through in the energy sector, being driven by renewable energy, specifically solar and wind, and of course, batteries and the intermittency and storage requirements to be able to drive that. And to do that, I think a lot of information and statistics and details have been presented and discussed. So the job here isn't really to kind of go into the analytics of the data. It's really, as a leadership forum, to discuss what are the responsibilities, the challenges, the opportunities, and the requirements to make sure that Africa is competitive in this space, that we understand the trajectory of where this demand is going, we understand the bottlenecks available, and to take advantage of the entire value chain, which is a core part. I think Africa as a whole have always been very much the owner and producer of raw materials, but not really capitalizing beyond that. And I think that's a massively relevant part in terms of the journey that Africa's on. So a key topic of this session is going to be around innovation, right? Innovation from a technology point of view, leveraging AI, talking about data analytics. How can we become more accurate, more efficient, more competitive in how we operate and how we drive this sector from an African point of view? So maybe I will open up, and I want to keep to the panelists here. I want this to be an open conversation. I want you guys to kind of chip in. I think the themes that I'm going to be talking about will be more or less relevant to some of you at some points, but you're all coming at this with different lenses, and I think being able to discuss this in that context is the best way to run a forum. So maybe I can start to my right and move forward. And if we just to kick this off in the theme that we're in, which is, leveraging the innovative tech opportunities to be competitive, maybe from a broad scale point of view, because it's a very diversified topic. But maybe, from your context, you can talk about what does that mean and how does Africa fit into that?
Well, the first thing that we have to ask is what is peculiar, specific to critical minerals that is different from what we have done so far in the mining and extractive industries. And the first conclusion we have to draw, I think it's a pretty easy one, is that the reason we have not seen much value addition and innovation that goes with it is precisely because Africa has been boxed into an interpretation of what is comparative advantage that is very much influenced by a colonial narrative, which is you supply commodities for others to develop. And for those who believe that it's because Africans don't know how to manage, or Africa has governance issues that justify that asymmetry, you just need to look into what are the regulatory dimensions that are influencing this type of behavior. And one of them, for sure, is the fact that Africa has not been able to have the policy space necessary to implement more aggressive value addition types of transformations. with a few exceptions, South Africa being one. Most of the minerals in Africa have been considered to be more profitable from a comparative advantage point of view to be processed elsewhere, which doesn't make any sense. But what is different, because that's the point, is that now, because of environmental concerns, people are realizing that it is a bit odd that you transport raw, extracted types of materials all the way across the globe to be processed somewhere else, and then all the way across the world to be consumed somewhere else. This is no longer tolerable. The shipping industry is the third largest polluter on Earth, and therefore you cannot really sustain that type of principles of comparative advantage. The second big change is that now, thanks to AI, we are entering a new era of intellectual property rights. Up to now, the value was very much linked to who possesses the innovation. So you create your innovation thanks to a good ecosystem, thanks to a good skill set, thanks to investments on R&D, and then you possess that edge by registering it as a patent, and therefore you try to make your bucks out of that advantage for a while you protect your intellectual property rights. And normally you had this space to actually take use and profit of it. With artificial intelligence, this changes considerably, because artificial intelligence is based on the principle of stealing intellectual property rights, because it mines all the data banks and basically produces something that is always original in a sense and defines the way we distribute value. And by doing so, and this is applicable also to the mining industry as much as any industry, is going to challenge the way the patents work. And therefore, despite the fact that we in Africa don't have as much innovation, we can profit from this sort of democratization to a certain extent of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have to be smart in the way we introduce our policies to take advantage of it. Last, I think it's very important for us to bear in mind that Africa's number one problem right now, economically speaking, is access to liquidity. So we just don't have access to funds. There are no examples in history where countries can develop without having access to a certain degree of funding. Let's call it credit or sovereign borrowing, whatever. Africa is considered to be in that distress or in that problem most of the times. But what people really don't realize is that we pay the highest interest rates in the world. People say, oh, but you get some free money, concessional lending or even aid. But what people don't say in the same sentence is that Africa's GDP has more than doubled since the year 2000, and there is no way ODA and concessional lending has even doubled. So which means it was already small, it's even smaller. So we're talking about something like 1.5 to 2% of our funding needs. So therefore, we have to go to the markets and we pay the highest interest rates. If you pay the highest interest rates and you have the worst conditions because of your credit rating, it's obvious that you are going to have more problems than anybody else. Even if it was families, if I pay more for more mortgage than my neighbor, it's obvious that I have more challenges. So that's the third problem that needs innovation. Because up to now, we kind of, I jokingly say, ministers in Africa discuss ODA, discuss aid at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And have very spare time to actually look into where they can find resources and savings in their own economies.
Yeah.
Just to talk about pension funds, Africa has $1 trillion in pension funds that is poorly used. So that is the third innovation.
Good, and I think you've touched on a lot of topics that I think we can delve into further. The interesting one I think is around AI and patents, and the transparency and availability of information is massively shifting, and you can look at that through different lenses. But I think for Africa to move forward, like you say, it is about being able to capitalize on leveraging the information available to us, and AI is certainly opening doors to that. And I also liked the comments around financing, and at the end of the day, access to capital and the ability to be able to scale is going to be pivotal. And you pointed out some interesting pieces that I think we can talk about further. If I go to a colleague from Glencore, of course, your operations and what you are doing, innovation technology is, of course, a core storyline there. And I know words that you often use are kind of transparency, traceability, right? That kind of understanding of how we can be more accurate in what we do. Maybe you can say a little bit about how Glencore looks at this and the DRC, and specifically how you're leveraging these things in your business today.
Yeah, thank you. It's true that Glencore has two operations in the DRC, producing copper and KoBold. KoBold being a byproduct of copper. And just maybe jumping in, I think that first of all, we usually talk about Africa, but Africa is very different. It's very different countries with very different needs and requirements. Talking here about the DRC, I guess that, we talk about transformation, but it's also about supply and demand. I can only supply what is demanded. And you said that things go through via certain destinations and do come back. And that's really maybe the issue, especially when you talk about KoBold. KoBold is being exported, I wouldn't say as a raw material, because we export hydroxide KoBold. And hydroxide KoBold is halfway of, or maybe a bit more than halfway of the final product. But when you talk about copper, we do produce cathodes. And the next stage after cathodes, it's another expertise, which would be cables and other things like that that we are not experts on. So I would say that when it comes to copper, we produce the final product as a company. But maybe now coming back to traceability and responsibility, I think that as a company, we see that through, first of all, having strong values that are aligned to the laws of the countries, international standards, and of course to sustainability. And that's why we do that. We cannot work in a country without abiding to the laws of the countries. And what we usually see is that our internal policies are sometimes way above what is required in country. And that's also why we are in a country, not to do exactly, take the lowest standards, but always have the higher standard in order to bring up other companies and sometimes also to influence the laws of the country at a higher level. That's the first part. And the second part, you spoke about communities, you spoke about people. That's really important because you cannot be operating in a country without taking into account the people that are living, and especially the people living around the communities. For us, ESG is so important for that. Not only do we take into account the environment in which we operate, we take into account the people, and taking into account the people is the employment. I mean, more than 95% of our employees are local people, are Congolese. And what is great is not only that they are Congolese at low level, I mean, they are Congolese at high level. Myself, I'm a Congolese, being president of Glencore in the DRC, being the chairman of one of the biggest mining company in country and in Africa, which is KCC. I think that that shows, and not just because it's me, I would talk about the CFO, I'll talk about whoever, and they are local people. And that's what we are doing to show that we are demonstrating that it's about developing our the communities, the people in country, paying taxes when we talk about governance, compliance, paying taxes as we have to pay them. For instance, in 2023, we paid close to $1 billion of taxes, royalties to the government, which represented a big portion of the revenues to the state. So I think that those are the basic things that a company in a country needs to do to show responsibility and sustainability, because all of this is not done for us, but it's also done for the future.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on some very important points around this ESG. The governance, which I know is something that you can comment on in a little while. But the environmental and social piece are absolutely paramount in Africa, and I think we have to be doing this responsibly. We have to make sure that we are, to your point earlier, that we are developing local capabilities, right? And that's from an education and a grassroots point of view, that we're investing in the societies and not relying on foreign intelligence coming in, and that foreign intelligence is then driving those raw materials out, as you mentioned, to be processed somewhere else and consumed somewhere totally different. So being able to kind of localize and domesticate the value chains, I think, is extremely important. That does come down to a lot of the ESG pieces. Yeah.
If I can add to it, I mean, having expatriates is not an issue, but it is important when those expatriates do come to transfer capacity, to bring something.
100%.
That's the need that is sometimes important.
It is absolutely about leveraging intelligence. We spoke about AI being one that opens it up, but of course there is expertise we need to bring in, right, to be able to create the foundations, to be able to transfer that knowledge. But it is critical that we are developing the kind of domestic capabilities. And I want to move on to the colleague down from you, which of course is KoBold Metals, and I know that you are, as a company, are heavily focused and forward-leaning around technology and innovation, and it's something that I think you are, leading with. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, what you're doing, leveraging this extremely important space as a thought leader, and where you see the importance of this going forward within the industry.
Okay, thank you. Well, speaking about KoBold, firstly, we are a full-stack tech company, but we're also a mineral exploration company. And trying to solve the problem of exploration worldwide, in the last 30 years, we can see that the cost of exploring is quite high. And many of the major miners, if you compare to other industries like oil and gas or big pharma, investment in R&D and exploration is really minuscule. And that is an opportunity, and why we call these critical minerals critical, because there's a risk of disruption of supply worldwide. So as KoBold, I mean, we were founded 7-8 years ago. We don't like to use the word skills transfer, because most of our software development team have never actually worked on a mine. They're ex-Apple, they're ex-Google. So when they come to a place like Zambia, they're actually learning from geologists how to explore. So it is bi-directional, and that's the disruption that's there. We've inculcated a culture that doesn't have this, an expat comes in and trains people and then leaves. It's actually, they're coming in and they've never stepped foot, say, in Africa. They've never stepped foot on an exploration project. And the learning and the innovation is bi-directional between, say, Chirirabombwe in Zambia and Silicon Valley. And that's really key in talking about the future of leadership in Africa in the mines. I'm a product of localization and development, having worked in the mining sector, but also starting to work around innovation. We have 60 projects in 14 countries, but our flagship is currently in Zambia with a few other greenfield exploration projects. We've entered Namibia, we are entering Botswana, and Africa, we know as a company will be important not only for our collaborators and fellow business partners, but also to industrialize and develop the continent. I like the comment that the Prof had talked about on, AI is like stealing and like when you go and mine. And to a degree, that's kind of true, but the term AI is not new. It's from the 1950s, but the last 3 to 5 years has been so disruptive in what it can do. And from a policy perspective, making data public allows people to get more competitive in exploring, to tap into these resources that the ministers before talked about, trying to attract investment into the country. Data is going to be critical, and making it public, making it transparent also enhances the level of investment and the competition. That way you don't have 1 or 2 players monopolizing a market in a country. The more competition there is, then it's not only about profits and efficiencies, but you're actually lifting opportunities for employment, opportunities for localization. So we're quite excited about it. People talk about the unique challenges linked to infrastructure, which are real on the African continent. We are fortunate that there are enough projects between Zambia and the DRC that have motivated talking about the Lobito corridor. Most people will see it as, it's the West trying to extract minerals out. And while that may be true for developing other industries, it's also important for intra-African trade between these countries all the way to Tanzania. So how do we also leverage building commerce and trade along the line of rail into other sectors and other industries? And as a company, we like to think about that. That's how we also think about community, not as CSR, but embedded in the culture of the company, that the investment in a tier 1 asset or many other assets that come online are going to stimulate other industries around. And that's how we like to think about it as KoBold.
I think it's exciting what you're doing. And, one of the interesting pieces is, that transfer of knowledge, right? Because, AI is kind of part of that storyline. But I think we have, in general, been quite insular and quite protective, right? And for Africa as a continent to thrive, right, there has to be kind of regional leverage and sharing of practices and expertise that we nurture and build locally. And you and your team are certainly at the forefront of a lot of these things. But I want to kind of shift over to our colleague at the end from the Minerals Council in South Africa. I know that, modernization is at the core of the Council's initiatives. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how the integrated advanced technologies are being utilized. And I know we spoke earlier, specifically around safety is a key element in terms of what you are looking at. But maybe you can talk about some of the impacts of these innovations thus far and what your role is kind of going forward.
No, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I think when we come to the topic of innovation and critical minerals, the important point to emphasize right from the outset, is that without critical minerals, there can be no innovation, whether it's innovation in green technologies, whether it's innovation in digital technologies, it's absolutely crucial. But at the same time, there can also not be any critical minerals without innovation. If we cannot mine these critical minerals in a way that is globally competitive and at the cutting edge of cost and also environment, social and governance metrics, then we're not going to make any progress going forward. So just talking a bit about the way in which we approach the modernization in the Minerals Council. Minerals Council represents about 90% of everything that is produced in the mining industry in South Africa. And we followed the route of partnerships, particularly public-private partnerships, a very important way of progressing innovation in the mining industry. So we've established this partnership called the Mandela Mining Precinct with the government. And it is based on a ratio of 2 rand for every 1 rand from us, is what government puts in. So the Mandela Mining Precinct is a public-private partnership where we get the opportunity not only to bring together the parties, the stakeholders and so on, but it is also very important for us to get different perspectives. You get, yes, the money, you get new stakeholders that are involved, but you also need to get those different perspectives. So those different perspectives allow you to undertake bigger challenges. So if you, for instance, we about 5 years ago, we worked with the other stakeholders and said that if we don't do something serious on the innovation front, we may lose 100,000 people in employment over the next couple of years. And that was became an existential challenge for the industry. And we said we have to work together as stakeholders to make that happen. So government got involved, us as private sector got involved, but then also the researchers became involved because they are the ones who are undertaking the innovations and that can actually make the impact. So that was an important one. And then there's often the notion that unions are against innovation. They don't like mechanization. They don't like digitization. But we found exactly the opposite. That they actually see it as an enabler for them to do better, to get more value out of the resources that they help to mine. So within this Mandela Mining Precinct is also a union consultative forum where we make sure that unions and the worker representatives remain online. So this Mandela Mining Precinct is, at the moment, it is busy with a study, specifically looking at the global competitiveness of extracting critical minerals. And we hope that once that study is completed, it will also provide more direction as to where we need to make investment for the innovations that will extract these minerals in a cost-competitive manner.
No, thanks very much. And it's important to understand the roles that organizations like yours represent. And I think that talk about partnerships is extremely important, that public and private recognition of the requirements and coming to mutually beneficial solutions. And I know you mentioned separately the concept of resource nationalism, right? Like what is the role of the governments and the entities to provide the ability to achieve these elements? And that is very much about partnerships. It's very much about understanding the route to that. And that is probably where Africa has failed in the past, is to kind of leverage and kind of truly maximize the returns on the resources they're set on. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about what you mean by resource nationalism and how and what that partnership looks like.
Well, normally it is associated with some negative perception on the part of governments trying to have more from the extractive industries. It can be more in terms of taxes, can be more in terms of contractual obligations of sorts. It can be more also in terms of local content. But in fact, if we think about the African Union, African mining vision, which was sort of the kickstart of this discussion, it is more about the comprehensiveness of mining within the economic development of a country. So not see it as a sector, but see it as an enabler of economic transformation. And that requires a more holistic view of what you do with mining. And when you go in that direction, then you realize that maybe the way countries have negotiated was very much with this extractive thinking in mind that transformed itself into a behavior that is very rent-seeking. It's just about how much I get to, fill my requirements to function as a government, and very often to function as an elite, because a lot of corruption will not, you don't even care about the entire social obligations that you may have. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that we know from various studies that are about $38 billion a year in Africa that are not paid by different mining companies if the negotiation of contracts was better. And now country after country is realizing that maybe this is because the contracts that we have are not good, and they are questioning the contracts. And when they do that, we call that resource nationalism. Of course, the consequence is that it may scare investors. Because if a country becomes too intrusive in the way he applies these kind of policies, it can be counterproductive because, we'll go somewhere else. We'll look the other way. But in fact, what we know is that more and more the mining industry in general is becoming dependent on intermediates. So sort of commercial entities that are not mining, but are the ones that actually possess the best of the value chain. And, if a country like Switzerland, that is a huge commodity trader, doesn't mine anything. So you go to Zambia, we're talking about Zambia. Well, who is the number one trading partner of Zambia? Well, officially it should have been China, because most of what is mined there goes to China. But it's not. The number one trading partner of Zambia is Switzerland, because the intermediates are in between. So I think this is what is sparkling resource nationalism and the need for renegotiating contracts.
Yeah, and I think...
Could I come in on that?
Yeah, please dig in.
Apologies, because I was only born in the 80s, but I'm going to talk like I was born in the 20s. To the same point, but on a different angle, Zambia has a 100-year history in mining, and like Prof said, rooted in colonialism. Even our border with our neighboring sister country is literally because of resources. But with that 100-year history of what was pre-Zambia, Northern Rhodesia, and Zambia, we have gone as a country through 2 cycles of nationalism, resource nationalization, which has really hurt the country. So there's the other side of literally having courageous conversations of the suspicion and mistrust between industry and government that has literally carried on into this current generation. It's only now that you can have constructive contestation discussions on how we actually boost the private sector, ensure there's compliance, increase the tax revenue base so that countries can continue to attract investment. I know worldwide there are many models, and people are looking at models from the Far East. There are models from the West that show economic growth over decades. If you grow 6%, you can literally grow your country's GDP or double your country's GDP within 14 years. So we also, certain countries, particularly Zambia, because maybe in the late 80s I saw that dwindle, I saw that impact of nationalization and what it did to us. And then recently in 2019, we went through a sort of blip. And with commodity pricing, having shocks, our countries are so prone to a lot of these challenges. So until we actually understand how to manage these resources, which is rooted in our country's histories, and have those conversations, KoBold Metals is a new entity and comes in and gets the treatment and the trauma of the past. And we literally have to kind of deal with that.
And how is that? I mean, what is the route to that happening, right? I mean, this concept of the private and the public sector coming together. I think a lot of the conversations in terms of what are the bottlenecks and what are the challenges to move forward has been rooted in policy reform, right? And making sure that there is a mutual beneficial solution, that we are bringing home the capabilities we need to kind of build out, but also that we are ensuring and recognizing the capital and the money that needs to be kind of being driven into those countries and societies. So are these conversations happening?
Yes.
And are we seeing a route, and are the players on that route coming to the table with the mindset of a mutual beneficial solution?
Yes. I mean, in Zambia, we have public-private dialogue forums that are really very direct between government. I'm happy I saw my colleague from the World Bank. I met him in Zambia, involving all stakeholders and collaborators to solve these issues, bringing the mining sector closer to accept certain things that were done, but not that all entities must be painted with the same brushstrokes. Yeah. That's really important to talk about reform in a meaningful manner, but knee-jerk policies can be more damaging than really long-term common industrialization. We all want to see Africa do better. We want to see more entrepreneurship and more innovation, homegrown innovation, not only brought in from outside. And it literally starts by having that dialogue. When there are piecemeal reforms or statutory instruments, they introduce so many shocks to the system, especially if your tax collection base is really, really small. So we have a long lead project. We need to deliver it in 8 years. We've got committed capital. And it's true, the premiums placed on Africa because of the perceived risk is really not good for investing in the continent. We need to unbundle that and talk about the opportunities that lie on the African continent to drive investment. We attracted Silicon Valley investment into Zambia when everyone was wondering about 2 cases that were happening. But the confidence we have in working with the government and sitting in these forums with our colleagues in different ministries and the technocrats and respecting their roles and their intentions as well, such that that suspicion between industry and government must come down.
And I think it's great to hear those stories. And I think the hope is, and this, I've been at the Africa Energy event, and the thematics are very similar. And for Africa to be successful, a lot of it's kind of driven by these policy stories, innovation, technology, but it's also African countries collaborating, right? Making sure that we see the vision of Africa and the role that Africa plays within these elements. So maybe, from a Glencore point of view, coming in as a private company, how does that work in the DRC? Are you aligned, or are we seeing the right conversations happening both in terms of building out the value chain and allowing the DRC to kind of truly capitalize on, especially KoBold, where, it's a monopolized market in terms of what's being produced. How do you see that balance between public and private?
Well, first of all, just because we were talking about the World Bank and some of the policies, I could here raise the issue of the mining code, for instance. The previous mining code was, in a certain way, slightly imposed to the private sector, with points that were completely rejected but have been approved. So now we are getting closer to a review of the mining code, and the private sector expects to be playing the role that it needs to be playing in partnership with the government. Secondly, some of our mining companies have GKMIN, which is the national public company, as a shareholder in the company. KCC now is having 5% of the state as a shareholder as well. So it brings in a different type of angle from the government as well, because you're now part of a company. Now you're going to maybe have benefits from what is being done by the private sector. So I think that this already is coming closer to one another, understanding the issues together. The other thing is PPPs do exist in the DRC, and some of them have been very successful. We, as a company, have had a PPP experience with the electricity company, SNEL, where we rehabilitated 2 turbines, 450 megawatts, and 1,000 kilometers to take that power from the Inga Dam to Kolwezi. It has been successful with some issues at some times because of the management of the line that has not always been perfect. So it has brought a few issues, but at the same time, it has been such a good collaborative partnership, and other companies have tried to do the same as well. But what it has brought here, it's first of all, with that partnership, it's not only bringing power to the company, it is a power that is benefiting to other communities, including in Kinshasa. And out of the 450 megawatts, 50 megawatts is allocated to the community in Kolwezi, where we have our operation. So it's a PPP that benefits, of course, the state electricity company, but it also benefits the population and us. And if that power was really at the top. So if it was really, there were no issues from time to time, it would enable us produce the greenest
Yeah.
copper and cobalt in the world, because when you look at the DRC, you have rivers and very powerful rivers all over the country. So it's something I think that the state needs to incorporate in the way they value the minerals from the DRC, because that's a solid advantage that it could and it would have. So I would say that we are not the only ones to have those PPPs, but yes, it's something that is quite often in the DRC and can work, and very valued by the state, of course.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. And I think, it'd be good to bring in our kind of minerals council here, because I guess you're sitting on to a certain degree on the other side of the table here. What do you see? I guess you introduced this concept of public-private partnerships a few minutes ago. How do you see this when it comes to policy reform, when it comes to finding a balancing position to ensure that we move forward? And this is, from the ability to attract investment to, the infrastructure, the, electrification. How do we make sure that we are competing, kind of market leading in the way that we operate and we develop, and both sides of the table see this as a fruitful and attractive road forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, if you take as an example, an ESG example of safety, which is often seen as the core of the ESG issues, because it speaks directly to the hearts of people. So about 20 years ago, our different stakeholders came to an agreement and said that our safety performance was simply unacceptable. So there was about 663 people who lost their lives every year, more or less around that number. And all stakeholders just said that this was unacceptable. So we need to have a common and a shared vision of where it is that we actually want to go. And all the partners within the partnership agreed that we want to have what was called zero harm. So we don't want, every employee needs to return unharmed from work every day. And that was very much the spirit of the agreement. Now, having got sight of such an agreement, that is only the starting point of your innovations. Your next level of innovation was to align the leadership within, within the Minerals Council alongside that, or along that vision. And we came to the innovation to say that this is not about leadership. It is actually about CEO-ship, because it's with the CEO where everything starts. They set the tone. So the concept of the CEO-ship, that our leaders, our CEOs need to lead from the top, that was, next level of innovation, looking at the role. And then it got into more of the technical issues. So we have this, what is called a learning hub, where there's teams of people who will actually go out to the mines and identify what is called leading practices. And those are innovations at the mine level, at the company level. Will identify these leading practices that are out there. And these could be digital technologies, these could be automation, mechanization, it could be a variety of different technologies. And they then, as this learning hub, they actually promote this leading practices throughout the industry. So I think this gives you an example, of the innovation. We often think of innovation only in terms of a technology. Talking about innovation in terms of shared vision, look at it in terms of leadership, look at it in terms of the collaboration within an organization like the Minerals Council, because the Minerals Council consists of 70 members who are vehemently competing with each other. Now it's a question of saying, well, here we've got to collaborate. Here it is an important issue from an ESG point of view. The credibility of the industry is at stake. And we as mining members, we need to work together very, very closely to make sure that we get to that vision of zero harm. So that's just one example.
No, I think it's a good example, and I think collaboration is, you know, an underpinning word, right, in terms of moving forward. Collaboration, learning. You know, as much as mining has been around, you know, since the dawn of time, you know, the evolution in terms of what we're mining and what we're utilizing it for has shifted dramatically, and I guess this is where this critical minerals piece comes in. So part of it is about availability of skills, right? We are going into sectors that are new, whether it's, you know, battery technology, whether it's, you know, the renewable sector, the types of raw materials required, and the demand trajectories of these are shifting. So I guess the question, and anybody can take this, is, you know, are we developing the skills required, you know, within Africa to be able to service this drive within the kind of mineral makeup and the opportunity space we're discussing? Is it there? And maybe on top of that, what role does African entrepreneurial startups, you reference technology, kind of merging with mining to kind of open up what may be a very established market in mining, but really taking this onto a new frontier. So maybe a question to you: education and knowledge and skill set of the workforce, and the ability for Africa to be leading from an entrepreneurial point of view. Anybody want to take that?
If I may, and I like the idea of bringing in education into the technology part, because today you cannot talk about technology as if it's something that is, you know, at a standpoint. It's something that is evaluating so quickly that education needs to be constant and permanent. But at the same time, as a company, what we do is, of course, when you take the community in Lualaba or in Kolwezi, they will not always have the right level of education or technology. And I think that as a company, our role is to ensure that we build schools, but not only build schools, but we also increase the level of education into those schools, that we partner with universities as well, and universities in the DRC, but with universities out of the DRC as well. And that's where the regional African role is important. The fact that we could also use, instead of just having expatriates coming from far away, we could also have expatriates coming from other countries in Africa, bringing back the diaspora as well of Africa into Africa. I think that those are the things that are very critical and important when we talk about education and technology. That's the way, as a company, we are approaching it.
Yeah. Yes.
So I would say it's a yes or no answer. Education reform is required to ensure that the fact that we have the youngest, fastest growing population in the world can be able to meet what technology is doing across various industries. For my existing mining operations, when mines purchase equipment from wherever in the world, they come with a lot of automation and smart technologies on them. You will find operators utilizing those technologies, and they're learning it on the job as they go. If you've been on any surface or underground mine, you will see it in the DRC, in Zambia, in South Africa. That is there. At the tertiary level and down to secondary and primary level, There are programs in Zambia where we're partnering with schools to look at robotics for children so that they can start engaging with this not after the age of 16, but when they're under the age of 10. Through KoBold, we've partnered with the University of Zambia, the KoBold University, to co-teach data science and geology with Stanford University. We've got the first cohort of 10 students, Zambian students, who will be trained and taught by Stanford professors, but also ensuring that the curriculum is embedded and approved through Zambia's university education system, because the geoscientists of the future will need to know how to code. So we are starting that work now. It has gotten a lot of buy-in from our tertiary ministries in Zambia. However, it needs to be universal across the continent, to her point that we should be able to also look for expatriates within the African continent. You will often find people working in West Africa, in Central Africa. The mobility within Africa needs to increase. It's, again, linked to the intra-African trade of not only goods, but as well as services. The fact that on this continent, Africans can speak 3, 4 languages, including French, Portuguese, English, and their local languages, should facilitate people at the border trading a bit more. And those are the people you need in these organizations. The African Mining Vision document of 2009 talks about this technology disconnect within the mining sector. But just look at what fintech has done to Africa to lift people and bring financial inclusion. I'll call it MinTech. I know the company is called MinTech, but we need that MinTech for now the smaller scale artisanal miners to partner with African technology startups. African tech startups exist. Kenya always has these tech incubator sessions. South Africa has them. Nigeria has them, because it's lifted millions of people who couldn't have access to financial solutions in rural areas. We need to translate that into the mining space so artisanals can work with homegrown tech startups from the African continent who should leverage their home ground space, not only waiting for it to come from the west or the east, but we're not seeing it on the mining side. But look what it has done with things like M-Pesa or MTN mobile money, where a woman in a rural village can transfer money across to the capital city and vice versa. And the customer base between user and the final buyer has increased. In the exploration space, that's possible, because future mining deposits out of the African continent will come from predictive models that will be built by AI. The confidence needs to be there to say, is this a mining deposit? How do we build this mine responsibly? How do we take it into operation? How does it operate and contribute to the national coffers? So until we start thinking of bringing these African tech startups, I would have loved to see more of them here at Mining in Daba, run and owned by African entrepreneurs. We're going to continue to have this gap, particularly for the small-scale miners, which is where we're saying the poverty levels are the highest.
Yeah.
Sorry, just a point on what she was, because this for me is an important one. She spoke about languages. It's interesting because most of these discussions are always taking place in English. I mean, I'm not an English speaker. My home language is French. And when we hear about the countries you're referring to, Zambia, Nigeria, South Africa, and it's always English-speaking countries, all of it is done within the English-speaking environment, and English speaker would expect all of us to speak English, you know. And it's interesting because most of the English people speak English and all the other national languages. But as French speakers, we have to learn how to speak English. You all expect me to be speaking perfect English, whilst it's not my first language.
Well, I'm just glad it's not in French today, so I'd be struggling.
Switch.
Yes, maybe, but I mean, it comes naturally. No. And I think that when we talk about Africa, that's also something that we should be incorporating.
Absolutely.
And not always think that Africa must always be speaking in English. There are other aspects, because when you talk about languages, there is another aspect to things that comes in as well.
And
Just thought that it was important
I think
to
language
raise that.
is a key piece. And I know we're coming to the end, but of course we have somebody representing academia here from UCT. So I think, you know, on the topic of education and aligning education to drive this. I agree, incubator programs, making sure that we're creating the platforms, we're exposing the technology, that we kind of growing through enablement as much as knowledge is a key pathway. But maybe you can kind of finish off just talking about, what you see from a grassroots point of view we're doing to drive that skill set.
Well, I know we are running out of time, so I'm going to be very telegraphic. But basically, the point that was said, that education is going to change in methods, in content, in priorities, that's obvious. The traditional way we felt education should work was about, having certifications that are done by institutions. In the future, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be much more who possesses the capacity to code, who masters the languages of communication. And certification is going to be very much a terrain of contestation. So that's one point. The second point, we are here in Cape Town. Cape Town is the headquarters of the largest corporation in Africa called Naspers, that has also a number of satellite companies that are part of the group. And they happen to be the largest world investor in digital education. Out of here. The largest in the world. Now, the bad news is that a lot of these investments are not in Africa. They're doing it all over the world, but very little in Africa. Which brings us to the issue of sometimes there is demand and there is no supply. So let's try to rectify it. And normally you rectify it with policy.
I think that's a great way to finish off, right? There is a demand, there's an opportunity space. I think we've spoken about technology, innovation, the role that we have in being responsible in how we act through ESG principles. There's capital out there, and it's about understanding how to access that capital and make sure that we are kind of driving Africa in the direction required to truly maximize the space, not just in terms of the raw materials available, but really building out that value chain. So thank you very much to my panelists. Thoroughly enjoyed having a chat with you.